you pointed out. Now, it's not a simple choice between speaking or not speaking English. It's a choice between speaking English and or speaking other languages.
Yes.
So we now have multilingual polyglot Americans and we have monolingual Americans. And people are making those choices. And there's a question of bilingualism, particularly with reference to Latino Americans.
Right.
So it's a complex web of choices, not a simple web of choices.
Right.
But I think then it becomes a little more complicated when we go to somebody like a book called Who Are We? By the same person who had come up with The Clash of Civilizations, Samuel Huntington.
Yes.
Professor Huntington's book. Now he believes that to be an American is not only simply to abide by the laws and to pay your taxes and do your duty and then be free to make other choices. He believes it is also essentially to buy into what he calls Anglo-Protestant values.
Yes.
Will you say assimilation necessitates an essential buy-in to Anglo-Protestant values?
I think, I don't know whether it necessitates it, but I think it's what has typically been what assimilation has meant. I think America inevitably persuades and encourages immigrants to become more individualistic in their behavior and in their values. That often sets up tensions and creates problems for immigrants, but it also creates opportunities as they become more individualistic.
Professor Skerry and I want Professor Nyang to jump in also, but here is the difficulty then.
Yeah.
As we think of citizenship in the modern context as the modern and postmodern notion of citizenship, which was seen to be empty of any religious or ethnic content, Samuel Huntington has actually reinscribed it with both ethnic, which is Anglo, and religious with the Protestant context. So we are saying that postmodern citizenship actually is characterized by religious and ethnic features, which is very local, very parochial, and very narrow.
Yeah.
So that creates all kinds of new problems on this issue, number one. And secondly, for instance, what about Anglo-Catholic?
Right.
After all, there's 69 million, I think the single largest church in the United States is Anglo-Catholic, not Anglo-Protestant, as a single church. So we have a discernible majority standing outside of that from the same faith.
Yeah.
And the same racial background standing outside of that. So therefore the question is that any choice that is made outside of that by definition has to be wrong. Okay, for instance, the gay and choice lifestyle stands outside of that. All right?
Stands outside
of the Anglo-Protestant, Anglo-Catholic church.
Why does it stand outside it?
Because those are not the traditional values that sort of enabled it. It is something that has evolved in contradistinction to them. The code that is defined by, in historical terms, by Samuel Huntington is that if we go to the traditional Christian view, it's outside of that. It's only non-traditional view of Christianity that will allow for modern lifestyle. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, no, I think this is a very fundamental issue that we have to deal with. I mean, I deal with integration and assimilation in two ways. I think in the American context, there was a desperate attempt after the Scandinavian. Gunnar Myrdal did that study.
Asian drama.
The American
American
dilemma, where they tried to grapple with the question of race. I think one thing that most of us in the United States have not been very brave and courageous to deal with regard to the evolution of the American identity. In fact, there is a mythology among many of our intellectuals in America to believe that there is one standard American identity that has remained constant without a rainfall in that environment since the founding fathers, which is a myth. It's not true. I mean, if you look at the history of the United States, America has gone through 3 revolutions. The first one was violent, but the subsequent ones came as a result of either internal crisis in the American Republic or, in the case of the Civil War, or depression. If you look at the evolution of American society with regard to integration and assimilation, what you have to recognize is that at the time the founding fathers met in Philadelphia, coming from 13 colonies, 94 to 96% of the Americans were really white Anglo-Saxon Protestants from the British Isles. mainly English, with some Scotsmen, few Irish. But by the time, that was why the West identity was real, because you have the numbers to back it up, you have the language to back it up. In fact, many of the Scandinavians, there's a famous passage written by a Scandinavian ambassador who visited the Scandinavians living in the Delaware Valley area, lamenting the fact that the Scandinavians were losing their language to English because they were being Anglo-Saxonized in colonial America before the Revolution. Now what has happened is the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant became the order of the day. It was supported racially, even though you have African Americans who are here but they were not citizens. You have Native Americans who are not citizens. So the American identity was limited exclusively to white males. The white woman would become American citizen.
That's fine. Before we go too far into the history, the question therefore is, given the view of history, Professor Nyang and Professor Skerry, what is the concept of modern American citizenship against which we can judge assimilation or lack thereof? Because I think both things have to be defined. The criteria around which we're judging it, and the process through which one may or may not achieve that outcome. So that's why I'm asking both of you to help me understand what is the notion of American citizenship, what is the demand on the immigrant today, and you said something very specific, there's the knowledge of English language. I'll add to that abiding and complying with the laws, paying the taxes, doing the right thing, but beyond that, what is the notion of assimilation?
Well, I mean, to get away from the historical perspective, which is important, and Samuel Huntington, who and which is, I think, a can of worms we could talk about, but I could put it much more simply, I think, in the contemporary context. I think to the man on the street in America, ordinary Americans, assimilation basically means that immigrants don't make any particular demands on the rest of society, that they just sort of
blend in?
Don't make any waves. No, I don't think blend in. I think before 9/11, Muslims in America were assimilating as far as most Americans were concerned. They were just not there. They didn't pose any challenge. They didn't pose any problems. They were very different from, say, Mexicans and Hispanics, who to the man on the street weren't assimilating because they were putting demands on the rest of society. They wanted bilingual education. They posed challenges in schools. They posed challenges at the balloting booth. It's not a definition that I share, but I think that's the conventional common sense view of assimilation.
Professor Skerry, shouldn't it be challenging given the circumstances that we've entered into in 21st century, not necessarily from a Muslim point of view, but from many different minority and majority points of view. For instance, the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, on August 11, 1947, said democracy is a system in which a numerical minority can have an equal chance of becoming a political majority. So any demand of assimilation has to be consistent with our understanding of how a democratic system works. The demand for assimilation cannot be contradicting and undermining the democratic promise.
Right.
That is the right of minorities within the society. If in the society, majority is going to make a number of demands on a minority, then by that social contract, it has to be obliged to accept some demands in reverse order also. So the whole notion of absolute majoritarianism was that majority can do anything to minority. But that was rejected in this country.
Yes.
And the whole constitution was designed as saying certain things cannot be done either to minority or to individual. And therefore the whole notion of limitation in the constitution. So given that framework where there is a democratic obligation of groups to negotiate, to compromise, to understand, to give and take, and there is an existential demand of people learning from each other. For instance, yoga becoming very popular in this country, vegetarianism, sort of, resource management, being a little more conservative thing. These are elements where all living organisms